Did anyone want to start us off with any questions from our in-person audience? Yes, you got a question here?
What was the proportion of lime, water, and hemp straws?
Yes, it's the lime hemp mixture. We use a system from France that is conveniently bagged 1 bag of hemp to 1 bag of lime. So it's a 10 kilo package of hemp to a 18 kilo bag of lime. And the water is added to a point. It's really touchy. Too much water, it doesn't stick, not enough, and it can also be a problem. So you gauge the water, and when you get a nice mixture, that's what you run with for the rest of your mixes. So yeah. Do you use a specific water? No, so there's no specific water. It's really just the quality of the lime and the quality of the hemp. There can be issues with hemp when it's too dusty; it won't bond properly, and there have been some major problems with buildings that have had issues with that. Which is where having a good supply chain is really important. And the industry here is, in Australia, people are starting to grow hemp, and it's getting to that point where we have quality materials to use. But yeah, it is access is the issue at the moment. We've been to some field days where the SARDI is starting to experiment with that, and there's some really good people starting to get involved with growing hemp as industrial crops. The other big part about the hemp production is it's very hard to separate the inner pith of the hemp from the fibre, and it's a very expensive machine required to separate those components. So I feel like it needs actually government investment to really push industries like this forward, because the status quo of building supply chains are big corporations that have control of the market. There's a need to invest more government money, because it's beyond the realm of small companies like us to really put too much into R&D.
And what's really the other bit that's kind of come up when we're talking about the supply chains, especially for the building industry, is making sure that there's enough investigation into, like as you're saying, standards for hempcrete, and making sure that there's also enough testing to verify even the fire ratings and things like that.
All very expensive processes.
Yeah. But that being said, there's a lot of energy to be able to do that in Australia, and I guess it's, as you were mentioning, it's a little bit more of like it's just almost like we're biding our time until that can actually start to grow from there. Do we have a question from the Zoom? All right, sorry, we'll just run that.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So the question is, could hempcrete be done by an owner builder to help reduce costs, or is it a bit too specialist or complicated?
Yeah, look, absolutely. It's very much approachable for an owner builder, but you do need to work with someone that has enough knowledge around the detailing. So the design of the formwork and the junctions with doors and windows needs to be really set up by someone that knows the system. The actual install of it is incredibly simple. A day of training and you can be a hempcrete installer. The formwork in the in situ situation is a little bit complex, because you need to have reasonable carpentry skills to get it straight and tidy. So recommendation for owner builders would be to have a carpenter there that can do some quick and efficient formwork, and then the installation is very simple. You need to get your mix ratios right so that the hemp isn't crumbly. That's the only real important thing. But once you've got that mix ratio, you're good to go.
Could I ask you a question really quick, Sam? Mainly around like the owner builder sort of like experience. Upon reflection on what you guys were going through, because you might have done heaps of research and got in contact with a lot of different things, but to kind of like take that sole responsibility as, I guess, the builder as well must come with quite a bit of, oh, am I doing things right, or things like that. So if just so everyone else is aware of that experience as an owner builder, can you give a little bit of insight of like how you made sure you had the right, talking to the right people, or what are some things that with the whole experience you've learned from?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of feel like a bit of a fraud when I say we were owner builders, because we worked with such amazing trades, particularly Hugh, who I mentioned, the master carpenter. Any question I had, he was able to answer. And so he also gave us all those contacts. I can imagine it being very difficult if you didn't have people in the industry that you really trusted. That being said, we did engage Lance Carl to be our building works supervisor. So there were some very specific things about straw bale in particular, looking at the footings details and processes for how we were going to strap down the bales, things like that we engaged and paid him as a consultant to come in and help us with. But there were so many times where we were just scrambling and looking on Google, and there's YouTube videos, and you just try and do the best that you can. And have a bit of a she'll be right attitude, I think was really useful. In the end, if things didn't look perfect, I knew that it was at least in part my fault. So I wasn't trying to, satisfy a client. I was trying to satisfy myself, and I'm not a perfectionist. So that was really, really helpful.
That's really helpful. Yeah, well, that's really fantastic, because I think a lot of people don't even know that is an option if they want to go down that road. So it's really good to I feel like share those stories like your own, so people are aware that if they wanted to, they could go down that path. They just need to make sure that they have the right support.
Yes, and for people wanting to labour on their own build, it can be a bit tricky in terms of insurance. So you may need to take out your own insurance if the people working on site aren't happy to cover you, which generally they aren't. And so the way I approached labouring was I got an experienced trade to show me how to do something, and then I would repeat it. So there's so many times where it's like, put this bracket in, it needs 6 nails, do that 50 times. And so rather than having someone that you're paying $50 or $100 an hour to do that, I could do that with my my basic carpentry skills, or basic labouring skills in general.
Yeah, right on. Any other questions from at the moment? You're thinking about it. Oh, I have a question in the front. Sorry.
So just to add on to that, I get asked as a licensed builder, we're an owner builder, and we want to do all the work ourselves and all that sort of stuff. It's getting harder and harder. I used to be able to do it. The certification, it comes down to the certification, and I can say, I can come along and inspect your work. At the end of the day, I'm liable if something goes wrong. And so there's not too many people who want to do that. So working alongside of a trade and you're doing some of the work yourself is fantastic. You just got to find that beautiful relationship that it will work, Yeah. So I hope that helps people.
Oh yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's always really good to know about the different kind of nuances and things like that as well. Any other question or just a comment on that one? Yep.
I'll just comment on that. Yeah, look, absolutely right. With finding a supervisor for owner building, like I strongly believe that owner building should be encouraged. Building is such an expensive thing, but it is finding a supervisor that's willing to take that risk and that liability for someone that's potentially unskilled. So yeah, it is. That's the hard part of being an owner builder, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask a question a little bit around I guess the performance of the building, so to speak, because you made a interesting caveat in your presentation, Sam, around the only air conditioning that you guys have is actually in your pantry. That obviously showcases that you have a little bit more interest in climate control in the pantry than in other parts of the house, which isn't the usual case. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on like how you've now lived in this house for probably like 3 or 4 years. How's that all been going? You know, through different kinds of extremes and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we do prioritize the wine over our own thermal comfort, that's for sure. If the wine gets too warm, it's no good. So, yeah, the house performs extremely well. My favourite saying is a passive house needs active participants, and sometimes we do feel like we're almost sailing a ship. You know, you're opening windows here and there to get the cross ventilation, particularly when we get a cooling breeze at night or it's cooler outside than it is inside. I turn on all the extractor fans and just try and suck as much air out of the building as I possibly can. With good management and paying attention to weather forecasts as well, you can kind of cool the house down before a heat wave comes as much as you possibly can, and then cool it as quickly as you can after. But that relies on you having good windows that you can fully open and catch those breezes that you know are coming from particular directions. For us, it's southeasterlies and southwesterlies we can rely on. Having a really good garden makes a big difference as well. So, and watering that garden, you get lots of evapotranspiration. Solar panels will shade your roof, so that's a fantastic thing to do, not just because of the energy, but because it's actually shading your roof. So yeah, probably the maximum the house gets is 25 degrees, I'd say. It has gotten up to 28 degrees inside when I happen to brew beer on a 38-degree day, and it generates a lot of heat. And it does get quite cool in winter if we've had several grey days in a row. It's dropped down to, I think the coldest it ever got was about 14. So, you know, we put on jumpers, you know, we have an electric blanket. The bedroom generally stays quite cool. So, you know, we heat the thing rather than heating the air. And I know people who have got passive houses that have an electric blanket that they keep on the couch rather than heating all this air. So, yeah, I think it can be done if you don't need to have 22 degrees all the time. If you're, you know, but that relies on a well-designed house that's well sealed and you actively managing it as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Have you gotten any feedback from your own client, the hemp house client, on how things are going?
Yeah,
especially in the hills, right?
Look,
So,
she has an air conditioner, but it is a fairly extreme climate up there. It's also open to the old house, so there's an issue where the old house is performing really badly, and the new bit's performing really well. We had intended to do some monitoring on it, but we've run that many tours through her house. We just thought we'd give her a bit of a break, really. Because there is a lot of interest for people to see the hemp in action. Yep.
Yeah, and you know, as you're mentioning, you have like the exposed concrete floors to be able to get like that passive, to be able to absorb that in the winter, and I'm pretty sure that helps.
Yeah, that does help quite a bit. It's a black slab, so it's also absorbing as much as possible. So yeah, she's very happy, very comfortable. But yes, does run the air conditioner.
Yeah, I could definitely imagine. I'm pretty sure having no air conditioning is pretty tough, especially in our kind of climate in South Australia, where we can get some pretty extreme bits. But it's also good to have this conversation around if you as a homeowner are okay with fluctuations, as well as sometimes getting toward, you know, like a 14 degree or a 28, then there's still ways to navigate that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I live in a house with no air conditioning and very thin walls, built when I didn't have a lot of money or expertise after I'd left high school. And yeah, you learn to live with it. It gets incredibly hot, but it also, like Sam's saying, it is sailing a ship at night. Pop everything open. There's some height volume, so you get some air draw through the building, and you learn to live with it. But yeah, it's not everyone's cup of tea. I'm happy to do that because I don't want to run the air conditioner. But at certain times it's too much, and you need to sort of go out of the house because it does get too hot.
Yeah. I think there's an acknowledgement of that, of even incorporating a lot of sustainability initiatives in there. Is can we make sure that we temper sort of like the extremes? So, you know, if we do know that in South Australia we are going to get a band of 40-degree days during the summers, then if it's constructed in a certain manner, then maybe we won't be feeling that 40-degree even inside. Maybe we can actually keep it down toward like the 30s and kind of have that little bit of respite. But the same thing, especially in the hills over in the winter, and making sure that we don't really get toward the extremes of like zeros and things like that, because if you have a not a well-constructed house, very leaky, then you're going to be feeling a lot of that. And it's also kind of like an interesting conversation where sustainability, if you're kind of thinking about sustainable design, we're also thinking about like quality of that, longevity of the quality of the build, as well as the longevity of that as a, I guess you could say like still a home, I guess, is an asset. So you want to make sure you're thinking about all those different, if we're actually thinking about sustainability, can that also translate directly into quality of builds and things like that as well?
It's interesting, Ken, because the big problem with the building stock in the whole country is the cheapness that they can build really bad houses for and get away with it. And so a lot of the things that we're implementing in sustainability will cost you more money. And my big encouragement always to a client is build a house that's smaller and build it better quality, longer lasting, and you'll have a better life in there. I think we need to learn to live with a little bit less, really.
Yeah.
I live in 25 square meters. Not that everyone can do that, but our
sure.
footprint is a 25 square meter house, and we have a mezzanine bedroom, and we have a big garden. So that's kind of our other room.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying everyone needs to live like that, but certainly to build better buildings, especially with how much they are costing to build these days, smaller is the thing.
Yeah. We have a question over here. Can we run the mic, please?
So I had a question that was sort of relating to that as a first home buyer, I guess, or trying to get into that sort of space. We've been finding it quite challenging to find banks that will lend for a less conventional sort of approach, looking for like a more sustainable build. And then of course the cost is a lot more, but there's that trade-off where you look for something smaller, of course. But yeah, I was wondering mostly for you, Sam, if there was any hurdles getting a bank to lend for straw bale, and also council planning issues or anything around that, trying to get a straw bale build through.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we built in Onkaparinga Council. I'll touch on the planning first. And thankfully, because the eco village is there, they've seen hemp, straw bale, rammed earth, they've seen everything. So it was really smooth sailing for us. The only question they had was around the shipping container, where we're going to clad it. I said yes, that was the end of discussion. So it was really easy. And I think that's generally true for straw bale. I haven't heard of people having trouble in Adelaide Hills Council or Alexandrina, or in Marion, there's a nice one in Warradale as well. And then around lending, it is tricky, and you don't want to have to, be beholden to a bank. So if you can find a good bank, we went with Bendigo. They were quite open to us building with straw bale. But one little trick that we did, and we're very fortunate to do this, was we borrowed for the land. We didn't actually borrow for the house. So we absolutely maxed out how much they'd give us for land, and then we used all of our savings to basically put into an offset account and just pay out. So they never saw a plan. We never had to ask them for money. It was, based on an asset that they couldn't dispute, the land. So if you can do that through borrowing, from family or whoever it might be, then I'd encourage you to do that, or just try and find a good bank. And if people know good banks, then share it around.
Just to bring you in on that, come in. I was just going to ask Sam if in terms of like financing and things like that, is there much that that's been made aware even from your end around clientele, because for yourself, you're also experimenting with different kind of like materials. So has there ever been any pushback from a planning sphere, or even like a lending kind of sphere on some of the materials that are being proposed?
No, I mean, we're in the middle of building a straw bale house at the moment, and that similar to Sam's experience, they had a bank loan and no issues with the council. The hemp, not from the council, but from the certifier, there was a little bit of interest about, during the design process, about the hemp. Because we were using a system that's been established in France for a long time, we were able to provide them with some documentation that illustrated its qualities, which was really helpful. I think you would have much more difficulty if you just had some bags of hemp and lime and no real kind of roadmap to it. And in terms of finance, most times our clients are not borrowing money because of the sort of places that we build. There's generally not too much loaning, so I haven't had any experience with that. But certainly the hemp now is being used so much. I think it's become normalised, so I think it'll get less and less of an issue. I mean, I've had some large Adelaide builders approach me to ask me questions about hemp. So they're obviously, these are kind of mass market housing groups that are obviously starting to look at it, which is great because it means that it will start to become a material that's used.
Yep, fantastic. So did we have a question on Zoom? If we could loop the mic to ask the question from Zoom, and then we'll come back into the front. Thank you.
So it was a question for Sam about the design process. And did you have to use a straw bale building designer? And can you talk a little bit more about the design process in general?
Yeah, great question. I forgot to give a shout out to Bowden Dorniak and Associates. They designed the house for us and did a really, really good job. We were super keen to get someone to design it that knew straw bale, just because we'd heard things like, the height of a bale is kind of important. And so you want to get your wall height to be matched to that. You don't want to end up with these awkward gaps where you have to be stuffing or doing other awkward things. So Bowden really, really experienced in designing straw bale and works with the engineer Gerald Whitman and Lance Carl, the straw bale builder. So those are kind of like the three people that have the cartel.
Yeah, it's the South Australian triangle, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
triangle of straw bale.
And it's really great that other people are getting into straw bale as well, because all those dudes are, I hope they don't mind me saying, getting on in years, so they're probably looking to retire. And so good that other people are getting involved. But we played around with designs. We gave a pretty specific brief. We knew what we wanted in terms of the spaces and rough sizes of spaces, and then it was just Bowden and Andrew, who was working with him at the time, to kind of collate that into something. And then we tweaked and adjusted, and it was quite a collaborative process. And one thing I really liked was we'd have ideas like, we really want to put in clerestory windows. We'd go to Bowden and he'd say, here's 5 reasons that clerestory windows are a terrible idea. And so he'd say, okay, well, I guess we won't put in clerestory windows. So he was quite good he didn't pander to us. And so that's not everyone's cup of tea. Some people want to sort of, be validated. Yeah, okay, I can design in clerestory windows, but I really valued that he gave us his experience and said, this is why it didn't work in such and such a build.
Yeah. Fantastic. We had a question up here.
Thanks again. One question for both of you. I think that you didn't have any specific R value for this material, for straws. How did certifiers match another material with this? Because as far as I know, there is not any such thing like a straw in softwares. Yeah. Do you know that how they compromise with this?
And this is a question mainly around like the NatHERS rating software. Is that correct? Is this like the NatHERS rating kind of like software? How do you assess it from the thermal performance? Yep.
Yeah, so I think our building came out at 7.8 stars, something like that. I take the star rating with a really big pinch of salt, because they don't take into account things like your blinds, or if you're growing vegetation, to the north of your property, or shading windows, all these kind of things. So I think the star rating it's useful, but it's not really that indicative of how well a house will perform. I think the way we kind of got away with it for straw bale is that I think it's really well accepted that it has a very high R value. So whether it's 10 or 11 or 12 doesn't really matter, because it's so high. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, I just wonder what material the certifier substitute in the software, because I know rating is not appropriate necessarily for any kind of buildings, and there is lots of other conditions and situations that impact. And yeah, you cannot necessarily trust in the ratings. But as far as related to city council and other organization, you need a certifier to give you a star rating. I just wonder how they did match the materials in Natters or First Rate or whatever they used.
I think the way that they're assessing it, and I could be wrong here, but in their assessment, they're treating it as an insulation material. So they're just inputting a value, an insulation value for that material to get the rating. So it doesn't actually matter that it's hemp or it's straw. It is just a value of this. And like Sam says, straw is so good, it's sort of in a range where they know that it's at least 10, say. And with the hemp that we had, the system we were using had an R rating for certain thicknesses of wall. So I think that's all that they're really using. It's less critical what material it is potentially.
That's correct. Yeah. And it is, and that in itself is also a really useful conversation for a lot of people, because you know, there's not only the requirements for buildings, so there's like, you know, being able to the structural integrity, fire rating and things like that in bushfire zones, but there is obviously a requirements for how energy efficient buildings are, and that also has to be thoroughly investigated, looked at, and be part of the design process. There is an ongoing conversation that it's not stringent enough in Australia, that there should be improved, you know, minimum standard requirements for buildings.
I think, Ken, if they can build what they're building out there and get it through on a star rating, it's clearly inadequate.
Yeah, exactly. And that's been also a recent conversation, as the National Construction Code is set to hopefully improve its benchmarks, which means there's a better baseline for everyone else in terms of like a level playing field. But again, it becomes a conversation around how do we make sure that we're integrating various aspects of sustainability. It doesn't have to be one way or another. So it's a more of like a performance outcome. So whether you're using natural materials or you're using very standard, you know, timber frame with plasterboard inside and maybe some color bond on the outside, how we actually create that building envelope becomes very, very important as we kind of go into the future. Is there? I was just wondering from the both of you in regards to reflections on the projects that you've kind of like presented. Is there? Are there any elements where you feel like that could have been done a little bit better, or, you know, on upon reflection we could have done this?
Yeah, I think you don't build
if you don't mind sharing.
You don't build anything without thinking, oh, should have done that a bit differently. In terms of the hempcrete material, one thing that we discovered is the higher you go, the slower it gets. The gable ends of our building took as long as the whole 3 metre high walls everywhere else. And so in the straw bale building that we've just recently done, we certainly didn't take the straw bale up into the gable ends because we had learnt that lesson that it's just very fiddly. So that was a learning curve. But everything else, we planned it so well because it was a new material. We were so meticulous in thinking about how it was going to go together that it did work as we imagined.
Yes, that's great.
It's a really horrible question, Ken, getting people to reflect on things that they wish they did differently. But you
don't have to answer.
No,
it was a little bit too much trauma.
No, it's very useful. It's very useful. So yeah, we went with aluminium windows. It was such a difficult decision. You know, we were thinking recyclability, just had this aversion to using plastic, PVC, and then lots of people in the Eco Village have timber windows, which do very, very poorly in that salty air, and so they end up just painting them with plastic paint in the end anyway. And so we've decided on aluminium, but it is by far the weakest part of the building. I understood them to be thermally broken, but they aren't properly thermally broken. Okay. So if sun's shining on them and, you know, it's 35 degrees outside, then they can be 35 or 40 degrees. And so that's quite a point of weakness thermally. Everything else we're really happy with. We could have maybe gone a little bit smaller, but yeah, it's hard. If I was to build again on a different site and not be worried about resale, then I'd probably build a single room dwelling, a fair bit smaller, and I'd like to do more of it myself now that I have the confidence and the understanding of all of the elements that go into building a house. One thing as well that I think the detailing could have been a bit better on was some of the timber walls. So the straw bale walls are incredible, completely sealed all the way down with render. The timber walls, like in the bathroom, there is a point where mice can get through the wall and up into the roof. So we've never had a mouse inside the house, but we do hear them up in the roof at particular times of year. And so we've got to trap them, and it's really frustrating, and I'm shoving steel wool in tiny little gaps. And so I wish we'd done a little bit more detailing around trying to make that a better seal.
That I spent a lot of time on. I've lived with rodents.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the rodent thing is a thing, and I spend a lot of time as a builder looking at those details, and they're things that, you know, you could easily forget and no one would ever know until you've got rodents. And especially in a straw bale house, we were meticulous about entry points. The hemp less so, because the mice won't eat the hemp. And I was just going to ask you, Sam, how many square meters was your house?
It's just over 100. Yeah. Yep. So a small house by, you know, Australian standards, but I feel like for two people, it's just Danny and I living there, 50 square meters each is pretty generous. You know, we don't lose each other in there, but you got to shout. You got to really shout if someone's in another room, so it could be smaller.
Yeah, right on. We're probably coming closer to the end of our time together, but do we have any final questions from the group here? Or we got two here. Fantastic. Let's try to get to those, and we'll wrap up after that.
Thank you. I'm building a kit granny flat, and I'm getting the windows, you know, double glazed, and a Skillion roof with, so I can put solar panels, and we'll reject a couple of fittings like the gas stove. Have you got any other tips for getting a kit home and changing, you know, what you can? I haven't checked to see how flexible they are. It's outless living. So yeah, any tips?
Yeah, friends did similar in Christie's. They got the biggest granny flat they could, and I thought it was such a smart thing to do because it's so much cheaper than even the smallest house. So double glazing, excellent. Absolutely maxing insulation wherever you can. So particularly in the ceiling space, so you can get R6 bats very, very easily. Did you say you're getting gas? No. Oh, good. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So all electric homes, I don't know why anyone's getting gas now, a whole extra bill and supply charge and whatnot, the way solar's going. No, you sound like you've done a really good job planning. Any tips from you? No?
The one things around that is thinking about airflow, because if you are in a very tight space, it can, a good thing is around smaller spaces is that, yes, they're a lot more affordable, but then the temperature can fluctuate a lot quicker than larger spaces. So if you do have a compact home, just also make sure that you are able to get airflow, whether it's actually opening windows and cross ventilation, or through some active measures such as ceiling fans, or like having a very small split system to be able to help with those extremes. because yeah, that can be sometimes people get very confused because they've had a very double glazing, very well spec'd glazing, as well as a lot of insulation, and they're like, oh, it still heats up quite a bit, and they don't really necessarily know how to, like Sam was saying, sail the house to be able to open it up and to be able to get the airflow when it's necessary. Because a lot of the smaller homes, if you had a fully active system, which is like a passive, not necessarily passive house design, but a passive house, which has like the heat recovery ventilation, you don't really have to worry about that much. But on the smaller it is, the more you have to think about that. We're doing the opening up the windows and turning things off and on. So really think about the ventilation. Yeah, orientation to the north would be fantastic for the majority of the windows, but obviously making sure that you have the controls externally. Yeah.
Can I ask, are you going concrete slab? Yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah. So similarly to Ken, I'm thinking if you have more thermal mass, then it will slow that fluctuation between extremes. So it'll hold on to that cool from the evening, say, in summer, and slowly release it during the day, and vice versa in winter. So you can build thermal mass into lots of things as well, like a kitchen island can have thermal mass, masonry. You can build it into internal stud walls. So using that cob system I mentioned, or, brickwork, or other more conventional stuff as well. So increasing the thermal mass in a small space.
Yeah. We'll have our final question in the back. Thank you.
That was really great. Thank you so much for both of your insights, all of your insights. I just wondered how easy, Sam, you found it to get involved in sort of maybe the decon sort of side of things, sourcing reclaimed materials. I spent a lot of summers on Moonta Bay Jetty, so very nice. I grew up down there, so it's great to see where it ends up. But yeah, just any information on that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so the longer you have to plan a build and the more space you have to store materials, you could really make use of some fantastic, quite often inexpensive or free stuff. The number of times I see things going, people have ripped down a house and there's just some really good stuff. Or the arts industry in South Australia in particular is always getting rid of things at the end of festival season. So we've gotten heaps of, galvanised iron for various projects and timber. So if you keep your eye out, you can definitely get a lot of good stuff. Gumtree as well. Salvage yards, I mentioned Adelaide and Rural Salvage. They're the biggest, and they take receipt of things like jetties and abattoirs and those huge buildings that are being deconstructed around the place. There are some other really great small salvage yards. One not far from here is Cut Loose in St Mary's, so just off South Road. They tend to specialise in house deconstruction, so they'll have house-sized timbers, flooring that have been pulled up, all that kind of thing. And so you can get some really good deals and get that instant history, and it is by far way more work though. So our carpenter cursed us for these 100-year-old doors. It was a labour of love to get them square and true, but they just look amazing. And so we thanked him. So thank you, Hugh, for spending the time.
Yeah. Would you like to add to that one, Sam? I'm pretty sure you were mentioning that you guys try to look at how different parts of a house can be reused. And stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in our early days of building, we did a lot of reclaiming of materials, and we used to, basically had a timber mill on site, and we'd be ripping and thicknessing and sanding. As we got sort of bigger, it was the time was the difficult thing, like Sam's saying. If you've got a client who's passionate and wants to run around to all the salvage yards and pick things out, take them home, de-nail them, sand them, you can get the most beautiful stuff. The old timber's the best timber you can get. You can't buy timber, especially hardwoods these days, that really have that kind of quality and seasoning. We also occasionally will reclaim fallen trees and mill them up for window sills or stuff like that. But again, it's not cost effective. So you need to have someone you need to be a little bit handy that you can do a lot of that work in your evening times. But you do get that beautiful texture and character that you don't get from new materials.
Thank you so much for the question as well. Just wrapping up for our session today, but I just want to say thank you so much again to all of you that joined us. I hope a lot of the content that we were sharing here is quite enlightening. But also, can we very much thank Martin and also Sam for joining us here today.